Venom: The Last Dance has dropped in theaters. Last night I went to go see it in 3D with my son, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about Venom: The Last Dance? And give me that point of reference. What did you think about the previous two films in this trilogy? Now, the reason I wasn't able to review this movie a couple of days ago when the embargo first lifted is because I missed the Austin press screening for the film because I was in California, actually at Skywalker Ranch and Lucasfilm, learning how the movie Ultraman Rising was made. Got to interview the director, tour Lucasfilm, all of that fun stuff. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, bucket list item, and so that's why I missed Venom: The Last Dance at the press screening, and boy, was it worth it, because that was a cool couple of days. When it comes to this film, I was actually very excited to check it out because the franchise has very much grown on me over the last several years. When I first watched the original one, I didn't care for it all that much. I thought the story was just kind of a big mess. But that relationship between Eddie and Venom just has something very charming about it, and I started to really enjoy these movies, and thus was excited to see how they would close out this trilogy of films. Was it good? Was it bad? Where does it fall in the spectrum of Venom movies? Let's get started talking about the good. And once again, the thing that glues these movies together is the Eddie-Venom bromance. They're just so much fun to see on screen, the bantering, how much they care about each other, how much they drive each other crazy. There's just something very distinct and unique about that dynamic that is fun to watch in these movies. And because this is the culmination of this trilogy of films, the relationship being built between them, it's able to kind of go to some more poignant places, draw out some bigger emotions, and because they're established by now, there's just a lot of fun that can be had. There are a lot of insanity that takes place, but if you enjoy the bromance, you get a ton of it here. The other thing that was really enjoyable about this film was the third act, where they did a good job with the trailers of not revealing too much about what the end of this movie is like. They show a lot of the first two acts, and then they have to be very careful with what they show in the back half of this film. And then the big surprise with this movie is that I really enjoyed the third act of this film. And the marketing did a good job of not giving away too much about the big payoff of the film. It shows a whole lot from the first two acts, and it's very careful with what it presents from the last 20 minutes of the film. And because of that, it's able to just kind of do some pretty wild, crazy stuff that's just a lot of fun to see and pays off this trilogy really nicely. And I think easily this is the best third act out of all of these movies, where it's just delivering the Venom action that you want. It has emotion to it. There's stakes. It just feels a lot more important and bigger than what we got in the previous two films. There's some fun side characters in here, in particular Ralph Ifiens. I'm sure I butchered his name. I'm not sure if I've heard it said out loud before. But what I love about this actor is that earlier this year, he's in House of the Dragon playing just a dead serious character. And in this movie, he's playing an entirely silly, lighthearted hippie character. And he's great at both of them. And he can transition between the two of them. And you're like, how is this the same guy that can play so serious and so silly in the same year and be convincing at both of them? Chiwetel Ejiofor is also in there, that brings kind of like a seriousness into the film as kind of the military guy that is trying to stop this alien threat that's out there. The character doesn't have a lot of depth, but he plays it with a lot of conviction, so the scenes probably have a little bit more oomph to them than they would if you didn't have an actor of his intensity in the role. And just in general, as a movie that set out to be the last dance to close out a trilogy, they find a way to kind of pull out some emotions in the final act of the film and final act of the trilogy that weren't really present in the previous film. So just a little bit more of a heartfelt touch in this movie. By this time, we're really invested into these two characters, And I think this one in particular, like, lets Venom explore his wants and his desires in whatever that looks like with a character like Venom. But there's things that he cares about and he values and he prioritizes. And this movie kind of lets him have that in this film, even at times where it's not necessarily best overall for the characters and things like that. He does things because he wants to and they matter to him and he cares about these characters or these things. And there's just something about that. There's just like, I don't know, like a sweetness to it. And when it comes to the Venom films, they've always done a good job of delivering fun and going for it and doing some wild, wacky, crazy stuff. And that is true with this film. That they're not trying to compete with the biggest spectacle team-up movies. They're kind of setting out to basically be comic book movie B-movies. That they're kind of schlocky in nature. They're intentionally hokey, cheesy. They go for cringe humor. And because of that, they're very enjoyable on a superficial level. And that was the case with this one. In my mind, it's very much in line with the previous two movies. There's not, of this trilogy of films, one that in my mind is distinctly way better than the others or way worse than the other. They're all kind of in that same ballpark with the same, essentially the same strengths and weaknesses. With that said, I had fun with this movie. Was it a good movie? I don't know about that. Let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. As we go into these aren't necessarily good or bad things. They're just things to discuss about the film. First one, I did go see Venom: The Last Dance in 3D. Is Venom: The Last Dance worth watching in 3D? No, absolutely not. If anything, I think it dramatically hurt the experience for me because I can't think of a single shot in the movie that I was like, oh, that was kind of cool. Even the times that I sort of noticed that the 3D was present, it was like dialogue scenes. You're not watching a Venom movie for the cool separation of the characters and the dialogue scenes. There were multiple sequences, in particular the Knoll stuff. It was just difficult to make out what was happening on screen. And then when it got into the action, the way that it's shot and the way the 3D is done, it just felt choppy and more difficult to see what was happening. And thus, I just paid for 2 premium tickets for an inferior way of watching the film. Other question people always ask about movies: does Venom: The Last Dance have a mid or post-credit scene? It has both. The mid-credit scene is potentially a tease for where something might go next. And it's not super exciting in my mind. It wasn't like, oh, wow, they're really doing that. It's not that sort of thing, but it's absolutely a tease for something that they might have plans for in the future. And then they have a post-credit scene that is a follow-up on a character and like a little plot line in the film that it's not like a joke. It didn't feel like it was teasing anything, and it wasn't that interesting. It was like, here's just this other thing that also happened. And you go, oh, okay. Oh, is this about to set something up? And it doesn't really. Like, there's a little, very small little, oh, okay. But not in a sense that it means anything significant. With all that said, let's move on to the bad. And I'll cut right to the chase. While this is a pretty entertaining movie, it's not a good movie. The story is both paper thin as well as overly complex. Like, the basic objective of the villain, our lead characters, it's all very straightforward, but it's all layered with a bunch of subplots that just don't really need to be there. And instead of spending its runtime on the things that are really interesting in the movie, in particular the stuff in the third act, it spends its time just on all of these little bits that might be entertaining. They might be superficially pleasant, but it's just superficial. There's no meat to it, and it's not stuff that we couldn't get in a different movie. So, as I mentioned before, one of the highlights is the third act, and I'm trying not to go into too many specifics on that, but it does some cool stuff that expands the potential of this world and introduces cool stuff. And you're like, oh, that was cool. That's what I've been wanting and waiting for. And instead of that running throughout 60% of the movie or even half the movie, it's just the last 20 minutes. And what do we get instead? We have Eddie and Venom traveling from Mexico to the United States on the outside of a plane. It's a funny little bit, but it's not actually interesting. It's just a little bit. And then we have them riding in a car with some hippies where they do sing-alongs. It's a funny little bit, but it's not actually interesting. When you think, what do I want to do with the Venom character? What's the most interesting things you can do with the Venom character, the Eddie, Venom, all of that? You don't think sing along with the hippies in the van, where Eddie and Venom have disagreements as to how charming the sing-along is. You don't think, let's do a dance number from the store owner in the first two movies. Like, that's not what your dream scenario is for a Venom movie. And so much of the runtime are these little bits that are kind of entertaining, but they're not the best use of your runtime or the most interesting thing to do with Venom. And then you get the interesting stuff that's also entertaining in the third act of the movie. And it feels like they knew what people actually want, but they wanted to save it for a little bit, or the budget wasn't big enough to make that the whole movie. So it's just saved for the end of the film. So you end on kind of a high note, but also we're closing out the trilogy right as you did some of the most interesting stuff in the entire franchise. And I don't know what it is about these Sony Spider-Man-less Spider-Man movies, but almost every single one of them feels like they were pretty dramatically reworked in the editing room, where big chunks of the movie are missing and they try and montage things together. Like they shot a movie that was 20, 30 minutes longer, and then they went, no, we want the runtime to be right around an hour and 45 minutes. So there's several different things in this movie that feel that way, where there's a segment at the beginning where they're establishing all the scientists and military subplots, and characters walk into a room and you see their faces talking, and then there's this segment that's like a minute long where it cuts away and it's just showing all these images of different things happening, and it's all done in voiceover, which is a trick that you do if you cut a segment out of a movie and you're trying to shorten a 10-15 minute segment into a 1 minute segment. You use voiceover and you just use images on top of it if you can't do a reshoot to fix it. That's what that sort of thing is. There's a character that I mentioned that is in a post-credit scene. The movie makes a very specific point of moving this character. Character's in one place, and then they're taken from that place, and it's followed up in the end credits scene. They don't appear in the middle of the movie. There's nothing for this character in the middle of the movie. And so there's this thing where they make a very specific point to snatch a character and do nothing with it. Does it have a subplot? Was that a bit in the movie and they cut it out and then it's replaced over here? And they just had to do a post-credit? Like, why did you do this little bit? Why did you take the character? You could have just cut the scene sooner. Just things like that where it feels like whole chunks are missing from the movie, or subplots, or something happened where we're watching like a pieced together version of the film. And maybe to that point, or maybe not, there's so much in this movie that's just mumbo jumbo of they're trying to explain the symbiote lore and how Null plays into it and why there's these creatures chasing after Venom. And they just like drop this very sudden, like, well, this happened because of this. And it just feels like it comes out of nowhere. And it's like, what? Why would that do that? Why would that? The mechanics by which they're able to track down Venom and what it means for what Venom can and can't do, like, it doesn't make any sense. It just feels like total screenwriting mumbo jumbo junk that just creates a plot device in the story. And once again, I don't know if that's the best they came up with, and that's when they were writing the script and they wrote this thing that just makes no sense whatsoever, or if there was a more complex plot device. There was something else that was going on, and because they trimmed out these other elements and these segments, it morphed into this other thing. So there's several characters that just feel like, why are they in this movie? Why didn't they do more? Why did they take this character and then it's not paid off? What was the deal with Venom stuff? Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit together properly on a single viewing. Even directorially speaking, I think there's a number of ways where it's just lacking. It was directed by Kelly Marshall, who wrote the script for the previous two films as well as this movie. She's friends with Tom Hardy. They've been working together for a long time. And, it feels in line with the previous two films with its vibe, but there's a number of different points in time in the movie that are meant to be emotional or the payoff of something. It's the big epic moment where a character makes the big choice, they make the sacrifice, the thing is revealed. When it has those moments, you know what you're supposed to feel, but I don't feel like any of those moments actually crescendo quite right. And that's what makes this movie so frustrating. It had all the ingredients to easily be the best film in this trilogy, but then it makes the same mistakes as the previous two films, and thus it's kind of right there on the same ballpark. It's fun, it's got some heart, but is it good? Not really.
What did you like about it?
I thought it was better than the second one. The kind of complexity of the movie. There's a bunch of new symbiotes. The main bad guy in the story was good. The third act was good. The action was fun. There's some really good side characters, and I really enjoyed it. I think this one's my favorite.
My friend Zach Pope, he tweeted out about this movie that it feels like it's the best and the worst of the franchise, and I think that's accurate. Where all the things that this franchise does well, this has more of those elements, and maybe the best version of those elements, and the best third act, and because of the nature of the story, it has a little bit more heart and emotional payoff than the other movies. And on the other hand, it has all the same problems as those films. And at a certain point in time, you go, okay, you were trying to figure it out with the first movie, but now 2 movies later, we're still making the same mistakes. You still don't know how to construct a story properly. You still don't know how to do emotional crescendos quite right. It still feels like chunks of the movie are missing. And the number of passes a franchise gets for being fun. Hey, Eddie and Venom are fun to watch. You get a pass. I feel like this franchise has kind of run out of passes at this point in time. And the send-off, the final film, should have been better than this movie was, though it is superficially entertaining. Overall, it's a C on the entertainment scale, a 7 out of 10. And there's no reason to rush out and see this movie in the theater. If you're a Venom fan, you can just wait to stream it. And if you're not a Venom fan, you can sit this one out entirely. It is not going to win you over. Hey, thank you so much for watching. You can check out some of my other videos right over there. Come back in a couple of days and you can see that ranking of the Venom films with Spider-Man 3 thrown in there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV to me.